Hello, dreamer. Welcome. We're so glad you've joined us tonight. Whether you are wrapped in soft blankets, resting after a long day, or simply seeking a quiet moment to let your mind drift, you've arrived at the perfect place to relax and to imagine. Now, imagine a world before history, a world with no writing, no cities, no machines, no metal, a world where survival depended on every breath, every decision, and every rising sun. This was the Stone Age, the longest and most defining chapter in the human journey. For millions of years, our ancestors lived only with what the earth provided. They shaped stone into tools, learned the power of fire, hunted animals across vast plains, and gathered roots, seeds, and berries to stay alive. They braved ice ages, storms and predators far larger than themselves, and yet, through struggle and ingenuity, they endured. From these beginnings, the first sparks of humanity's creativity and resilience emerged. Tonight, we begin a documentary journey into that world. Together, we will trace the footsteps of early humans, exploring how they survived, how they adapted, and how stone by stone they built the foundation of civilization itself. Before we move forward, just one gentle reminder. If you're enjoying this calm journey through time, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It truly helps us continue bringing you more relaxing documentaries like this one. And since you might drift into sleep before the end, it's best to do it now while you're still awake. And we'd love to hear from you. Tell us in the comments below where in the world you are watching from and what time it is for you right now. It's always beautiful to see people from every corner of the globe gathered here together, united by curiosity and calm. Now take a deep breath, let your body grow still, let your mind settle into the rhythm of time itself. The Stone Age awaits. The earliest tools, though simple, reveal something profound about the minds that shape them. A flake chipped from a stone might seem accidental, but the repeated patterns discovered in archaeological sites show intent. Early humans did not simply stumble upon sharp edges, learned to create them. They struck stone against stone in just the right way to peel off a sharp blade. A process called knapping. Imagine the patience it required to learn this art without teachers in the modern sense, without drawings or instructions. Knowledge passed through demonstration, through repetition, through the quiet observation of children watching their elders. Every tool carried within it not just utility but the memory of those who had made tools before. Each new generation refined the craft, slowly, almost imperceptibly. Over tens of thousands of years, the old Owen flakes gave way to more sophisticated hand axes, part of what archaeologists call the Aequilean tradition, named after the site in France where such tools were first recognized. These teardrop-shaped axes were sharper, more durable, and versatile, able to chop wood, skin animals, and dig into hard soil. Holding one in the hand connects us across nearly 2 million years to those who once held the same form of stone, whose survival depended upon its edge. As tools grew in complexity, so too did the strategies of survival. Groups learned not just to scavenge carcasses left by predators, but to organize hunts of their own. They tracked animals across open plains, using persistence and cooperation. Some hunts may have lasted hours, or even days, following herds until exhaustion slowed them enough for humans to strike. It is believed that one of humanity's greatest weapons was not claws, nor speed, nor strength, but endurance. Unlike most animals, humans could sweat, allowing them to run long distances without overheating. A group of determined hunters with patience and coordination could chase even swift animals like antelope until fatigue overcame them. This method, known as persistence hunting, required immense stamina but yielded high rewards: meat, fat, and bone marrow, dense sources of energy vital to survival. Each successful hunt was a triumph not only of physical ability, but of social unity, a reminder that together, humans could achieve what alone would be impossible. Yet for all these advancements, life remained fragile. Predators lurked at every turn. Imagine the terror of hearing the roar of a lion in the darkness, the growl of a cave bear echoing through a valley, or the padded footsteps of a saber-toothed cat. Humans were not apex predators at first. They were vulnerable, soft-skinned, with no natural armor, no fangs, no speed to outmatch these beasts. Their safety depended on fire, on tools, and on the strength of their group. To travel alone was almost unthinkable. Together they might light torches, throw stones, or raise spears in defense, their hearts pounding as shadows moved at the edge of firelight. Survival was never guaranteed, and every night carried its own dangers. To rest was to risk, yet without rest, survival was impossible. The balance of fear and necessity shaped the rhythm of their days and nights, a constant reminder of the fine line between life and death. The climate, too, was an ever-changing adversary. The Stone Age unfolded against the backdrop of shifting ice ages and warm periods, each reshaping the land and the challenges it posed. During glacial periods, massive ice sheets stretched across continents, lowering sea levels and exposing land bridges. Humans migrated out of Africa into new and unfamiliar worlds, crossing into Europe and Asia, and eventually reaching the far corners of the Earth. These migrations were not grand expeditions but slow drifts of families and groups seeking food, water and shelter. With each new land came unfamiliar plants, strange animals, and harsh climates that demanded adaptation. In colder regions they clothed themselves in animal skins, learned to build shelters against the wind and relied heavily on fire to survive. In warmer regions they contended with heat, scarcity of water, and predators lurking in the grasslands. The earth itself was a restless partner in their struggle, sometimes offering abundance, sometimes stripping it away without mercy. As humans spread and endured, they began to develop not only tools but culture. Evidence suggests that even in the Paleolithic, our ancestors painted on cave walls, carved small figurines, and perhaps even sang or created rhythmic sounds. These acts were not mere decorations but reflections of something deeper, the spark of imagination and meaning. To paint an animal on a cave wall was to connect with it, to honor it, or perhaps to summon its spirit before a hunt. To carve a figure was to give shape to ideas too vast for words alone. These early forms of expression remind us that survival was not only physical, but emotional and spiritual. Humans were not machines of endurance, they were beings of wonder, of curiosity, of fear and hope. In their art and ritual, we glimpse the beginnings of a mind that sought more than survival. Still, the practical difficulties of daily life could never be forgotten. Illness struck without warning. A simple infection from a cut could be fatal. A harsh winter could starve entire groups. A drought could wither plants and drive away herds. Mothers faced the dangers of childbirth without medicine, often risking their lives to bring forth the next generation. Children grew quickly into responsibility, learning to gather, to carry, to listen, for the survival of all depended on every hand. Elders, though weakened by age, carried the weight of memory, their knowledge of plants, animals and landscapes essential for guiding the group. In this way, every person mattered, and community was more than companionship. It was survival itself. Through it all, one truth remained constant: survival required adaptation. Humans who could learn, adjust, and innovate were the ones who endured. The Stone Age was a crucible that forged resilience, shaping the species we would become. Each challenge, each hardship, each fleeting victory carved lessons into the collective memory of humanity. It was in this long, difficult dawn that the foundations of everything we know today were laid. Without the Stone Age, without those who endured its trials, there would be no cities, no civilizations, no written words to carry our thoughts. Every comfort of modern life is built upon the struggles of those who once chipped stone by firelight, who once faced the dark with nothing but each other and their fragile hope. And so, when we look back on the Stone Age, we do not see only a distant past. We see ourselves, our origins, our resilience, our enduring will to survive. The background and meaning of the Stone Age remind us that humanity is a story not of ease, but of struggle met with creativity. When we ask when it began, we find ourselves tracing time not in centuries but in millions of years. When we look at the first tools, we see the first sparks of thought, of problem solving, of control over the world. And when we ask why life was difficult, the answer comes clearly: because every breath was a fight against hunger, against predators, against the cold and the unknown. Yet it was in this difficulty that humanity was born, and from it, the story of us all begins. Imagine the cold creeping in across a vast plain at dusk. The sun sinks low, and its last golden rays stretch thin over the horizon. Shadows lengthen, the air sharpens, and already the noises of night begin to stir. Somewhere in the tall grass, a predator moves with silent intent. In those moments, the human body shivers, the skin prickling with the memory of countless ancestors who dreaded the darkness. But then, a hand reaches down to stir the embers of a fire, a spark catches, flames rise, and with it comes a glow that pushes back the fear. The predator halts, blinking in the light, unwilling to cross the barrier. For those gathered around the circle of fire, survival is not a matter of trembling in the dark. It is a matter of guarding the flame. The first tools that chipped away at stone may have given our ancestors a weapon, but fire gave them something far greater: control over the environment itself. Anthropologists believe that fire was used by hominins as early as 1,000,000 years ago, perhaps even earlier, though at first only opportunistically, taking flames from lightning-struck trees or smouldering landscapes. To capture fire, to cradle it as one would a fragile newborn, was an act of reverence. They could not yet create it at will, but they could feed it, protect it, and keep it alive. And so, small groups of early humans carried embers with them on journeys, preserving coals in bundles of bark or within hollow bones packed with moss. The fire was never truly their possession. It was a living force they borrowed and tended. Once fire became a constant presence, it began to shape the very rhythms of human existence. Nights were no longer short bursts of fearful sleep broken by every crack in the underbrush. Instead, fire allowed for longer periods of rest, deeper slumber, and the chance to recover fully from the exhaustion of the day. Sleep itself became safer, richer, and more restorative, which in turn sharpened the mind and strengthened the body. In ways subtle but profound, fire changed the tempo of life, carving out moments of safety in a world that had never known such luxuries. But its gifts extended beyond comfort. Fire allowed humans to eat in ways their bodies had never known before. Raw meat was hard to chew, tough to digest, and often dangerous. But when it was cooked, fibers softened, fats melted, and parasites were destroyed. Even the simple act of roasting meat made calories more accessible, fueling brains and bodies with greater efficiency. Roots that had once been inedible could be transformed into nourishment by heat. Seeds and grains, when toasted or boiled, released energy previously locked away. Fire was an alchemy of nature, turning what was once barely edible into food that sustained growth, thought, and creativity. Some scientists believe this change was pivotal in human evolution, allowing our ancestors' brains to grow larger, more complex, and more capable of imagination. Picture a circle of hunters returning with their prize, a deer or a boar. Before fire, they would have torn at raw flesh, each bite a struggle, each meal a risk. But with fire, the meat sizzles over the flames, fat dripping and sending smoke curling into the night. The scent drifts, mingling with the crackle of wood, and for the first time, meals become more than sustenance. They become shared experiences, events that gather everyone together. Children laugh, elders teach, stories unfold, and food becomes ritual. Fire transformed eating from survival into culture. The fire itself became a teacher. To tend flames required patience, foresight, and cooperation. Too much wood too quickly, and the flame would smother. Too little, and it would die. Fire demanded balance, observation, and skill. In this way, it taught discipline. And in learning to manage it, humans practiced forms of planning that would one day serve them in farming, building, and invention. The flickering of flames on cave walls even encouraged imagination. Children stared into the glow, shapes shifting in the shadows, sparking the first seeds of creativity. Some anthropologists suggest that art, the cave paintings and carvings of the Paleolithic, was inspired by those dancing shadows, a world of forms revealed by light and fire. Yet fire was not only practical, it was sacred. In its presence, humans felt both awe and humility. Fire destroyed, but it also gave life. It could burn forests to ash, but in its circle, it could nurture a family. Over time, reverence for fire wove itself into rituals and beliefs. Evidence suggests that some groups treated fire as a spiritual entity, keeping it burning constantly, passing its embers from one generation to the next. In some caves, archaeologists have found ancient hearths preserved across centuries, suggesting fires tended in the same place for untold years, linking people not only to their own survival, but to those who had come before them. In the glow of the flames, time itself felt different, longer, deeper, eternal. Consider for a moment a single night in a Stone Age camp. The fire burns at the center, its glow flickering across rough-hewn faces. The group is small, perhaps 20 souls, huddled together. A child sleeps against her mother's shoulder, her breathing steady in the warmth. Hunters sharpen stone points in the glow, their hands steady as sparks leap. An elder begins to hum, a low rhythmic sound, soon joined by others. Words follow. Stories of ancestors, of hunts long past, of dangers that must not be forgotten. The fire listens, crackling in rhythm, casting its light on each face in turn. Above them, the stars wheel slowly, but below, the circle of fire binds them, protecting, nourishing, and reminding them of their shared existence. Without fire, this gathering would be impossible. Without fire, humanity itself would be unrecognizable. Fire did more than transform the night, it transformed the landscape. Early humans began to use fire deliberately, setting small blazes to clear undergrowth, drive animals into the open, and renew the growth of grasses. This practice, what we might call controlled burning, changed ecosystems, making them more favorable for hunting and foraging. Humans were no longer just passive inhabitants of nature, they were shaping it, bending it to their needs. Fire gave them a kind of power that no other species possessed, the ability to engineer the world around them. It also gave them the courage to move farther than ever before. Flames offered warmth in frozen climates, making migration into colder lands possible. Imagine a band of early humans crossing a snowbound landscape, the wind cutting across their faces, their bodies wrapped in animal hides. In their hands they carry torches, in their packs glowing embers kept alive. Each night they gather wood, kindle their flames, and build small hearths. Without fire, this journey would mean death. With it, they expand their territory, pushing into lands once unreachable, laying the groundwork for humanity's spread across the globe. The intimacy of fire even shaped language itself. Around the hearth, humans found reason to speak, to teach, to remember, to entertain, to soothe. The warmth and light extended the day, giving time for conversation and storytelling. Some anthropologists believe that the very act of speaking, of weaving words together into memory and myth, found its true beginning in these moments by the fire. Language, that most human of traits, may have been kindled by flame as surely as wood is. Over centuries and millennia, the relationship with fire deepened still further. It was not only a protector, but a forge. In time, humans would learn to use fire to shape stone more finely, to harden wooden spear tips, to bake clay into pottery, and eventually to melt metals from rock. Each step in this long journey began with that first accidental spark, nurtured into flame. Fire was the thread connecting the earliest survival to the first technologies, the bridge between raw nature and the beginnings of civilization. And yet, for all its power, fire never lost its mystery. Even today, when flames leap in a hearth or a candle flickers in the dark, there is something ancient in the way we watch it, something that reaches back to those first nights when humans discovered its glow. It is more than light, more than warmth. It is memory. It is continuity. It is survival, embodied. For our ancestors, it was the difference between life and death, but it was also the first great discovery that made life more than just survival. Fire gave them a sense of home, of community, and of belonging. It was, and remains, the first great gift of human ingenuity, a flame that still burns within us. At first light, the camp would stir slowly, with the soft crackle of embers being coaxed back into flame. Smoke curled upward into the dawn air, carrying with it the faint smell of ash and cooked meat from the night before. Hunters stretched their tired limbs, feeling the cool ground beneath them, while gatherers reached for their baskets, already thinking of the paths they would walk that day. Children rubbed sleep from their eyes, giggling quietly or tugging at their mother's arms, while elders murmured to one another, recounting dreams or offering quiet advice. Each morning began the same way, with the unspoken awareness that the hours ahead would decide whether the community would eat or whether hunger would tighten its grip once again. The hunters gathered in small groups, spears and stone-tipped tools in hand. They moved silently, their senses sharp, scanning the horizon for signs of movement. Perhaps they would follow the tracks of deer or shadow the path of wild cattle across the plain. Each man and woman in the group had their role, the strongest prepared to strike, the keenest eyed to watch for danger, and others to flank and guide the chase. Hunting was never a casual task. It required a plan, patience and courage. Because the animals they pursued were powerful and could easily kill if the hunt went wrong. The hunters relied not only on strength, but also on strategy, communicating with subtle gestures, glances and shared instinct born of years of practice together. While the hunters moved outward, others turned their attention to gathering. The women, often accompanied by children, set out into the woods or along the riverbanks. Their knowledge of plants was immense, passed down in whispers and demonstrations, and in the careful teaching of each generation. They knew when berries ripened, when roots could be pulled, when seeds could be shaken loose from tall grasses. They carried digging sticks to pry tubers from the soil, and woven baskets to hold their finds. Children helped in their own way, sometimes slowing the group, sometimes discovering small treasures. A child's eyes, closer to the ground, might spot mushrooms hidden in the shade or nuts scattered in the undergrowth. Even play had a purpose. Children mimicked adults, practicing how to throw small stones, how to dig carefully, how to taste a plant without swallowing, until they were sure it was safe. The landscape itself became a guidebook, a memory stored not on paper but in minds. A particular grove might be known for honey in spring, while a valley might burst with berries in summer. People remembered which riverbank yielded roots, which hillsides sheltered edible greens. This memory was shared, repeated, reinforced through song, through teaching, through constant practice. Forgetting meant hunger, and hunger was unforgiving. By midday the sun climbed high, and the hunters, still on the trail, grew weary. Endurance was their strength, the ability to walk and run tirelessly where other creatures faltered. Sweat cooled their bodies, allowing them to outlast even the swiftest prey. Sometimes the hunt was short, a successful ambush with spears raised at just the right moment. Other times it stretched across hours of pursuit, the humans jogging steadily as the animal galloped and slowed until finally, exhausted, it could be brought down. The moment of the kill was always tense, filled with risk, but also with profound relief. The weight of survival lifted, at least for a time, and with it came gratitude for the animal, for the tools, for the skill that had had them to this point. Back at camp, those who remained prepared for the return of the hunters. Fire was fed with dry wood, flat stones arranged for cooking, water gathered from streams. If a hunt failed, they would rely heavily on what the gatherers brought back, and there was no guarantee it would be enough. The gatherers, meanwhile, returned with their own bounty baskets heavy with berries, roots bundled together, nuts rattling softly in their containers. The younger children brought gifts too, a shiny stone, a bird feather, something small but significant, tokens of their growing role in the group. When the hunters returned successful, the camp came alive with celebration. The animal was not seen as mere food, but as a gift of the earth, a spirit that had been caught and now shared. Before cooking, rituals might be performed, gestures of respect made to honor the life taken. Then, piece by piece, the animal was divided. The fire blazed brightly, the smell of roasting meat filling the air, the sounds of laughter and chatter rising as hunger gave way to satisfaction. These meals were more than sustenance. They were moments of bonding, of reaffirming the ties that bound everyone together. To eat was to share, and to share was to survive. Night brought a different rhythm. As darkness fell, the fire became the center of the world, its circle of light holding back the vast and unknowable blackness beyond. Flames crackled, shadows danced on faces, and voices grew soft. Stories filled the night, tales of past hunts, of ancestors, of spirits, and mysteries that lived in the wind and stars. Around the fire, children fell asleep against their parents, elders gazed into the embers, and hunters rested weary bodies. The dangers of the wild, predators, cold, The uncertainty of tomorrow felt more distant in the presence of fire and kin. The day had been survived, and that was enough. Across seasons, the rhythm shifted but never ceased. In spring, foraging meant fresh greens, tender shoots, and migratory animals returning. In summer, fruits and berries were plentiful, and the sun stretched long into the evening. Autumn brought nuts and seeds, which could be stored briefly or eaten in abundance. Winter, though, was the hardest. Game grew scarce, plants withered, and the cold gnawed at bone and spirit alike. It was in winter that the ingenuity of humans was most tested, and where fire and cooperation became the difference between life and death. Groups huddled closer, moving less, rationing food, waiting for the return of warmth. Each season taught its lessons, and the cycle repeated year after year, century after century, across millennia. This was life as a hunter and gatherer, endlessly moving, endlessly searching, endlessly adjusting to the whims of nature. Hunger was the constant companion, effort the unending task, and reward the brief but precious relief. Yet, within that cycle lay more than survival. It held connection to land, to sky, to one another. It shaped humans into creatures of resilience, endurance, and cooperation. It fostered curiosity, teaching people to notice the smallest signs in the world around them. It nurtured storytelling, as each success and failure was remembered and passed along. And in this balance of hunger, effort, and reward, something profound was born, the roots of humanity itself. Even now, long after farming replaced foraging, and cities replaced camps, echoes of this life remain within us. The satisfaction of a shared meal, the thrill of a chase, the comfort of fire in the dark. These are not accidents of history, they are memories carried in our blood, whispers from an age when survival depended on the endless dance of tracking, gathering, hungering, and feasting. To understand the hunter-gatherers is to understand the foundation of who we are, shaped not by abundance but by scarcity, not by certainty, but by the resilience to face each day anew. The world grew colder, slowly at first. Then with a grip that seemed unshakable, ice crept across the continents, inch by inch, year by year, until vast sheets of frozen land smothered valleys and mountains alike. Winters stretched endlessly, and summers grew faint and fleeting. For our ancestors, survival became a test against the most merciless force they had ever faced, the Ice Age. Imagine standing in that world, where the breath freezes in the air before it fades, where winds slice through even the thickest firs, where the horizon is a blinding expanse of white broken only by the dark shapes of animals adapted to this frozen stage. Yet, within this harsh, frozen wilderness, humanity endured. They learned to live not by conquering the cold, but by adapting to it, by bending their ways to the rhythm of ice and snow. The cold was relentless, but so too was human determination. The people of the Ice Age traveled across frozen plains where glaciers towered like mountains, their sheer walls shimmering blue and silver in the pale light. Rivers ran sluggish beneath their skins of ice, and forests were stunted, their branches heavy with frost. The air was sharp and dry, carrying with it the howls of wolves and the distant rumble of shifting glaciers. In this land of extremes, to survive was to understand not just how to endure the cold, but how to find life in a world that seemed determined to erase it. One of the most remarkable companions of this frozen time was the mammoth. These colossal creatures, with their long, shaggy coats and sweeping tusks, were not only a sight of awe, but also a source of life. To hunt a mammoth required extraordinary courage and cooperation. It was a task that demanded planning, knowledge of animal behavior, and unity of purpose. The rewards, however, were in. A single mammoth could provide enough meat to feed a community for weeks, fat to fuel fires, bones to build shelters, and hides thick enough to fashion clothing against the cold. Standing beside such a beast was to feel both fear and reverence, for they were both prey and partners in survival. Alongside the mammoths roamed woolly rhinoceroses, herds of steppe bison, and reindeer, each uniquely suited to the icy plains, each a moving source of nourishment for those who dared to pursue them. But there were predators too, stalking the same frozen world. Saber-toothed cats, with their massive fangs glinting in the pale sun, prowled the shadows of forests and valleys. Cave lions and dire wolves hunted in packs, their sharp eyes and stronger bodies always a threat to vulnerable humans. To walk across the snowy plain was to be aware, always, that one could quickly shift from hunter to hunted. Firelight and the protection of numbers were the only shields against these dangers, for humans could not outrun or overpower such beasts. Instead, they relied on wit, on vigilance, and on tools that transformed weakness into strength. Clothing became more than protection. It became a second skin. The furs and hides of animals, once taken for warmth alone, were now stitched together with increasing skill, shaped to cover the body fully. Bone needles, delicate yet strong, allowed humans to sew garments that fit closely, trapping heat against their bodies. Hoods shielded faces from icy winds. Boots lined with fur protected feet from frostbite, and layers of hides insulated even the most vulnerable. These were not luxuries, they were lifelines. Without them, the cold would have claimed countless lives. With them, humans pushed further into lands that seemed unlivable, stretching their reach across continents. Shelters too evolved in response to the ice. Where once caves and rock overhangs had been enough, now people built structures from the very bones of the creatures they hunted. Mammoth tusks and rib bones arched overhead, forming frames for shelters that were then covered with hides and insulated with snow. Inside, firelight flickered across walls of fur and ivory, casting a golden glow against the shadows of the endless night. These shelters became havens, fragile pockets of warmth in an unforgiving landscape. To step inside was to escape, if only briefly, from the cruel embrace of the cold outside. Tools took on new importance in this era. Stone blades were sharpened finer, spears fitted with sturdier points, scrapers designed to clean hides more efficiently. Hunters crafted spear throwers, extending the power of their arms, allowing them to strike from a safer distance. In some regions, they fashioned the first delicate carvings and engravings, small figures that spoke not just of utility but of spirit, of the need to find meaning even amid hardship. Each tool, each creation, represented not only survival, but also a step forward in human ingenuity, a refusal to surrender to the elements. Endurance, however, was not only physical, but also mental. To live through the Ice Age was to live with constant uncertainty. Food was never guaranteed, warmth never assured, safety never absolute. Communities had to be tightly bound, for isolation meant death. Together, they shared labor, shared resources, shared stories around the fire. It was in these moments, when flames danced and winds roared outside, that culture deepened. Words, gestures, songs and myths passed from lips to ears, carrying not just information but comfort. The Ice Age pressed humanity to its limits, but it also pressed people closer to one another, forging bonds that went beyond survival into something far more enduring. Children learned early the skills that would keep them alive. They were taught how to recognize animal tracks in snow, how to scrape hides, how to tie sinew for sewing. Their play often mirrored survival, small games of hunting and gathering that doubled as lessons. Elders, though weakened by age, were revered for their knowledge, their memories of migrations, their wisdom in reading the signs of the land and sky. Every member of the group, no matter how young or old, had a place, a role in the collective task of staying alive. And still, despite the challenges, there were moments of beauty. Imagine the sight of the aurora borealis painting the frozen night sky with shifting ribbons of green and purple, a wonder so profound it must have seemed like the voice of the spirits themselves. Imagine the silence of a snowy plain, broken only by the distant trumpeting of mammoths or the crunch of footsteps across ice. Even in struggle, there were reasons to marvel, reasons to enjoy. The Ice Age was harsh, but it also shaped resilience, creativity, and unity, the very qualities that would carry humanity into the future. Over tens of thousands of years, people adapted again and again, shifting their lives as the ice advanced and retreated. Glaciers melted, then returned. Rivers swelled and froze. Animals flourished and vanished. Through it all, humans bent, but did not break. They learned to live in the shadow of giants, to carve shelter from bone and snow, to wrap themselves in the warmth of other creatures' hides. They learned that survival was not simply a matter of strength, but of imagination, of cooperation, of hope in the face of endless cold. In this way, the Ice Age was not only a trial, but also a teacher. It demanded ingenuity and offered lessons in return. It taught our ancestors that the world could change on a scale beyond comprehension, and that they too must change to endure. It carved resilience into the human spirit, etched adaptability into human culture, and gave rise to tools, shelters, and traditions that would echo long after the last glacier retreated. It was an age of hardship, yes, but also an age of triumph, an era when, against all odds, humans walked beside mammoths, stared into the eyes of saber-toothed cats, and proved that even in the coldest of worlds, life could find a way. In the deep silence of the ancient world, long before writing, before books, before even the faintest idea of civilizations, something stirred in the minds of early humans. Survival had always been their first and greatest concern, finding food, finding warmth, finding safety. But as they gathered around fires, as they pressed their hands against cave walls to escape the cold winds outside, another need began to grow within them. It was not the need for meat or water, but for meaning. And from that longing, imagination was born. These earliest sparks of creativity were fragile, delicate, but they were powerful enough to endure across tens of thousands of years. To this day, if you walk into the ancient caves of Lascaux in France, or Chauvet, or Altamira in Spain, you will still see them, the first galleries of the human spirit, painted in ochre, charcoal, and blood, alive with the shadows of animals that once roamed the earth. The caves tell us something remarkable. They tell us that our ancestors who faced hunger and predators and cold also felt the urge to tell stories. On walls lit by the flickering light of torches, bison stampede, horses gallop, mammoths lumber forward, and deer leap gracefully across uneven stone. These were not casual drawings, not idle marks. They were visions, carefully chosen, created with purpose. To paint a great bull across the wall of a cave was to bring that animal into the firelight, to make it present, to give it life beyond the hunt. Perhaps it was a ritual, a way to call the animal into being, to ensure success in the chase. Perhaps it was memory, a record of what had been seen and overcome. Or perhaps it was something even deeper, a first attempt to bridge the gap between the world outside and the world within, between reality and imagination. And it was not only in paintings that imagination revealed itself. Carvings too began to appear, shaped from bone, ivory, and stone. Small figures, often of animals or of human forms, emerged in the hands of these early people. The famous Venus figurines, with their rounded forms and exaggerated features, were among the first symbols of fertility and life. To hold one in your hand was perhaps to carry hope, to believe in the continuation of family and community, even in times of scarcity. These carvings spoke not only of skill, but of thought about what mattered most, what gave life meaning beyond the immediate struggle to survive. Symbols began to take root, etched into cave walls, or carved into tools, simple marks that may have carried great weight for those who understood them. These could have been signs to mark a place, to remember a path, or to connect one group with another through shared understanding. For us, thousands of years later, they appear as mysteries, fragments of communication we can no longer fully decode. But to those who made them, they were powerful, carrying ideas across time and space, in ways that spoken words could not. Around the fire, rituals took form. Imagine a group gathered in the heart of winter, their bodies pressed close to one another for warmth, their eyes fixed on the flames, as a storyteller lifted their voice. Perhaps they mimicked the sound of a mammoth, or the cry of a bird, or the rhythm of hooves striking the ground. Perhaps they painted their bodies with earth pigments, or wore masks shaped like animals, blurring the line between human and beast. These were not mere entertainments, they were lessons, binding the group together, teaching children about the dangers and wonders of the world, giving structure to life in a land that often seemed without mercy. Rituals became a way of carrying knowledge forward, but they also became a way of soothing the human spirit, reminding each person that they were part of something larger, something shared. The seeds of belief took root here as well. To live in a world where lightning split the sky, where rivers flooded without warning, where death was always near, was to live in mystery. And in mystery, humans sought answers. The painted animals on cave walls may not only have represented hunts, but also spirits, guardians, or forces beyond the visible. Fire itself, with its power to give warmth and destroy, may have been revered as something sacred. Burial sites suggest that people cared for their dead, sometimes leaving behind tools, ornaments, or food, as if the journey continued beyond death. This was imagination turned inward, a recognition that life might have meaning beyond its final breath. Creativity was not separate from survival, it became part of it. A carved spear thrower, shaped like a reindeer, was not only practical, but also beautiful, infusing a tool with spirit. Painted walls may have taught hunters about the behavior of animals, reinforcing memory through image. Songs and rhythms may have helped coordinate hunts, bringing unity to groups whose survival depended on cooperation. By transforming necessity into expression, humans gave themselves an advantage that went beyond muscle and stone. They gave themselves resilience of the mind, the strength to endure hardship with hope. Even in the most difficult conditions, imagination provided moments of wonder. In the depths of caves, away from the howling winds, torchlight flickered across painted walls, making the animals appear to move, to come alive in the shadows. In those moments, it must have felt as though another world existed alongside the one they knew, a world shaped not by hunger or fear, but by vision and possibility. To create was to remind oneself that life was not only about surviving the cold night or finding the next meal. It was about leaving a trace, about speaking to the future, about saying, "We were here, and this is what we saw, and this is how we dreamed." As imagination flourished, so too did the bonds within communities. A shared story, a shared symbol, a shared song. All of these knit people together, creating identities that lasted longer than any individual life. These acts of creativity were the beginnings of culture, the earliest threads of the vast tapestry that humans continue to weave today. And though tens of thousands of years have passed, though cities now stand where glaciers once spread, we still feel a connection to those ancient artists. Their handprints pressed against stone are like echoes reaching across time, whispers reminding us that imagination is as old as humanity itself. In this way, the first signs of imagination were not small or incidental, they were the first steps into a new way of being. They transformed how humans saw the world, how they saw themselves, and how they endured the challenges around them. Through cave paintings, carvings, symbols and rituals, early humans began to live not only in the present, but also in the realm of ideas, of meaning, of dreams. And it was this ability to dream as much as the ability to hunt or make fire that allowed them to survive, to grow, and to begin shaping the long story of humanity. The long reign of the Ice Age was finally drawing to a close. For countless generations, human beings had endured a world gripped by cold, where glaciers spread like frozen giants across the land, where mammoths and woolly rhinoceroses roamed the tundra, and where survival meant braving a climate that never seemed to soften. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, the Earth began to change. The great sheets of ice, which had blanketed much of the northern world for tens of thousands of years, began to retreat. Valleys once locked beneath ice re-emerged. Rivers began to run freely, and forests sprouted where only barren tundra had stretched. For humans, this was not just a change in scenery, it was a transformation of the world they knew, a reshaping of every rhythm of life. This was the dawn of the Mesolithic Age, a time of transition, when the Earth shifted from the frozen silence of the Ice Age to a warmer, more fertile world, and humans were forced once again to adapt. Imagine standing in that world. The air feels softer, the winds less harsh. Where once endless plains of steppe grasses stretched, now groves of birch, oak and pine rise in thick clusters, filling the land with shadows and new sounds. Birds call from the branches, filling the skies with movement. The rivers, swollen with glacial meltwater, rush swiftly across the land, carving new paths. Lakes appear in depressions once pressed down by the weight of ice, glimmering like mirrors in the sunlight. To early humans, this was a world filled with both opportunity and uncertainty. For though the harshest cold was gone, a new challenge lay ahead, learning to live within landscapes that were richer but more complex, where prey no longer gathered in vast, predictable herds on the open plains, but scattered into forests and wetlands, demanding new strategies, new tools, and new ways of thinking. For thousands of years, humans had relied on the great herds of reindeer, bison, and mammoths, tracking their migrations across the open plains. These animals were more than food. They provided hides for shelter and clothing, bones and ivory for tools, sinew for thread, and even fuel when wood was scarce. But as the climate warmed, many of these Ice Age giants began to vanish. The mammoths and woolly rhinoceroses disappeared first, unable to adapt to the shrinking tundra and changing vegetation. The great herds of reindeer retreated northward, following the colder climate. Left behind were forests full of red deer, wild boar, and smaller animals, creatures that were far more difficult to hunt than the massive, slow-moving mammoth. To survive in this new world, humans could no longer rely on the old ways. They needed agility, innovation, and patience, and so they adapted. The Mesolithic hunter was no longer the solitary figure stalking across open plains with a heavy spear. Instead, humans crafted lighter, more versatile tools suited for forests and rivers. Small, sharp blades known as microliths became the hallmark of the Mesolithic toolkit. These tiny blades, carefully chipped from flint, were set into wooden or bone shafts to create arrows, harpoons, or fishing spears. With microliths, hunters could craft weapons that were quick, precise, and suited for bringing down the faster, more elusive animals of the woodlands. The bow and arrow, first appearing in this period, gave hunters the ability to strike from a distance, silently and effectively, in dense forests where spears would have been clumsy and slow. But the transformation was not only about tools, it was about the landscapes themselves. Rivers and coasts became lifelines for communities. The retreat of the glaciers created vast networks of waterways, rich with fish, waterfowl, and plant life. Humans learned to master these new environments. They began to weave nets from plant fibers, fashioning intricate patterns that could trap fish in large numbers. With spears tipped by microliths, they waded into rivers and struck with precision, catching salmon and trout as they swam upstream. Shellfish became a staple along the coasts, and shell middens, massive piles of discarded shells, still stand as silent witnesses to these ancient meals. And then there were the boats. Perhaps one of the most remarkable achievements of the Mesolithic age was the creation of watercraft. Using stone adzes, humans hollowed out logs to form dugout canoes, shaping them carefully with fire and tool, until they could float and carry passengers across lakes and rivers. For the first time, humans were not bound only to land, water, a pathway, a way to travel, to fish, and perhaps even to connect distant groups. Imagine the sight. A small canoe gliding silently across a misty lake at dawn, a figure kneeling within it, guiding it forward with a paddle carved from wood, scanning the water for ripples of fish or the flight of waterfowl overhead. These were not only tools of survival, but symbols of ingenuity, proof that humans could learn to live within any landscape the earth offered. The Mesolithic age also marked the deepening bond between humans and animals. For millennia, humans had lived alongside wolves, sometimes competitors, sometimes companions. But it was during this time that wolves began to transform into something more, the first domesticated dogs. At first, perhaps, orphaned wolf pups were taken into camps, fed and raised, until they learned to trust their human companions. Over generations, those wolves that were more docile, more loyal, became permanent partners. Dogs brought new possibility. They could help in the hunt, tracking the scent of prey through forests too dense for human senses. They could warn of danger in the night, their ears catching sounds humans might miss. And they offered companionship, a bond that stretched beyond utility into something more emotional, more enduring. In a world that was always shifting, always uncertain, the loyalty of a dog must have been a comfort unlike any other. With forests, rivers, and coasts to explore, Mesolithic humans began to live in smaller, more mobile groups. Camps were set along riverbanks or in forest clearings, often temporary, shifting with the seasons and the movements of resources. In summer, People might gather along the coast to fish and collect shellfish. In autumn, they might move inland to hunt deer or forage for nuts and berries. Winter camps were set near sheltered places where wood and food could be stored and where fires could be kept burning against the cold. This rhythm of movement was not random, but carefully tuned to the cycles of the land. Each group knew when the salmon would return upstream, when berries would ripen, when deer would be fattest before winter. Life was still hard, still precarious, but it was balanced with a new kind of harmony, a partnership with the landscapes that had been reshaped by the retreat of the ice. Food was no longer only about meat. The forests offered nuts, hazelnuts, especially, which could be roasted, ground, or stored for winter. Wild berries grew in thickets, mushrooms sprouted after rains, and roots could be dug from the earth. Along the rivers, reeds and water plants provided both food and material for weaving baskets or nets. This wider diet was not just a matter of taste, it was survival. In the Mesolithic world, adaptability was everything, and those who could draw sustenance from many sources thrived. Yet alongside these practical adaptations, there remained the ever-present human spirit of imagination and meaning. The same people who carved boats and wove nets also decorated their tools with patterns, painted their bodies with ochre, and buried their dead with care. Cemeteries from this time show people laid to rest with ornaments of shells or animal teeth, with weapons at their side, and with traces of red ochre sprinkled across their bodies. These rituals suggest that even as humans adapted to new landscapes, they still carried within them the same longing for connection, for memory, for belief. The Mesolithic transition was not only the story of survival, but of expansion. Expansion into new environments, new relationships, and new ways of living. It was a time when humans proved their resilience, showing that even as the world transformed around them, they could transform too. They did not mourn the loss of the Ice Age plains. They found new life in forests, rivers, and coasts. They became fishers, gatherers of nuts and fruits, builders of boats, and keepers of dogs. They became more than ever before true masters of adaptation. And in this adaptation, they laid the foundation for what was to come. For it was in the Mesolithic, with its boats and nets, its shifting camps and wider diets, that humans first began to settle more deeply into the land. They were no longer only wanderers chasing herds across endless plains. They were beginning to form lasting relationships with the places they lived, to read the cycles of rivers, to shape wood and fiber into tools of precision, to lean on animals, not only as prey, but as companions. These were the quiet, steady steps that led in time toward farming, toward villages, toward the Neolithic revolution that would change everything once again. But for now, in the Mesolithic, the world was still wild, still free, and still balanced between survival and imagination. It was an age of transition, of adaptation, of discovery, and it proved, once more, that humanity's greatest tool has always been the mind, ever ready to reshape itself as the world reshaped around it.